Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1960, and the entire world is basically holding its breath. Why? Because after 15 long years, one of history's most notorious monsters, a man who had seemingly vanished off the face of the earth, was finally captured. And we're not talking about just any bad guy. This was the logistical mastermind behind the systematic murder of millions, the architect of the Holocaust. And for 15 years, he was a ghost. His name was Adolf Eichmann, and the world was absolutely desperate to bring him to justice. I mean, the hunt for Eichmann was this massive global manhunt that stretched on for more than a decade. You see it right here. He slips away in 1945, creates a whole new life for himself in Argentina under a fake name, and then, bam, in 1960, Mossad agents pull off this incredible, dramatic capture. So the stage was set for a historic trial in Jerusalem. Everyone was watching, ready to finally confront the embodiment of pure evil. But then, when Adolf Eichmann finally appeared in the courtroom, sitting inside this protective glass booth, a wave of, well, confusion just swept over everyone. The man on trial just didn't match the monstrosity of his crimes. There was this really profound and unsettling disconnect. Everyone was expecting a monster, right? A fanatical, hate-filled mastermind. Instead, what they got was this mild-mannered, middle-aged paper pusher. He seemed, as one person there put it, terrifyingly normal. He just sat there, speaking in cliches and bureaucratic jargon, almost like he was incapable of having an original thought. So the question that was just hanging in the air was, how? How could someone so utterly unremarkable be responsible for such unparalleled, systematic evil? This question baffled everyone, the prosecutors, the journalists, the survivors. It just seemed impossible. But there was one philosopher in that room who saw something deeper, something way more disturbing than just a monster. That philosopher was Hannah Arendt. Now, she was a German Jewish intellectual who had actually fled the Nazis herself, so this was deeply personal. She was covering the trial for The New Yorker, and as she watched this horrifyingly normal man, she came up with a phrase to explain it all. A phrase you've probably heard: the banality of evil. So what on earth does that mean, the banality of evil? Well, Arendt's whole argument was that Eichmann wasn't a monster in the way we usually think of one. In fact, he was something way more terrifying. He was a nobody. His evil was banal, meaning it was commonplace, it was boring, because it didn't come from some deep well of hatred. It came from a profound, shocking lack of thinking. Now, you can imagine this was a deeply shocking and controversial idea. Victims and their families, they needed Eichmann to be a singular, absolute evil, a monster they could hate. But Arendt insisted that was a dangerous oversimplification. For her, the real danger wasn't some deep-rooted demonic force. No, it was this thoughtless, fungal evil that could just spread across the surface of society, infecting everything it touched. So how does this thoughtlessness even happen? Arendt pointed to a key tool that Eichmann used to distance himself from the horrific reality of what he was doing: the complete and total distortion of language. Think about it. Eichmann never spoke of murder. He talked about special treatment. He wasn't orchestrating a genocide. He was administering the final solution. This kind of administrative jargon, this officialese, it acts like a psychological shield. It lets a person carry out monstrous acts without ever having to confront the fact that they're a mass murderer. Nope, they're just an efficient problem solver. And please, don't think this is just some dusty old history lesson. We are surrounded by this kind of thing today. Language is constantly used to soften harsh realities. Civilian deaths aren't deaths, they're collateral damage. People aren't fired, the company goes through corporate restructuring. It's the exact same mechanism of evasion that let a guy like Eichmann sleep at night. This brings us to why all of this is so important, right here, right now. Arendt's analysis of Eichmann wasn't really about one man in a glass booth. It was a profound, timeless warning for all of us about the catastrophic danger of just surrendering our ability to think for ourselves. You see, her ultimate point was that totalitarian systems don't just rely on fanatics. They absolutely thrive on the quiet conformity of ordinary citizens who just stop asking questions, who stop thinking critically, and who simply follow orders. For Arendt, the refusal to think is not a passive thing. It's an active choice, a choice that clears the way for unimaginable horror to happen. So, Arendt leaves us with this huge, deeply personal responsibility. In a world that so often encourages us to just go with the flow and not make waves, she reminds us that the simple, private act of stopping to think critically, well, it isn't just a philosophical exercise. It is our most powerful defense. It's maybe the most necessary public duty we have. All right, we're about to dive into one of the most chilling and honestly one of the most controversial ideas of the 20th century. It's a concept that was born from the trial of a notorious Nazi officer, a man whose job was to meticulously organize the murder of millions. No, really, just think about it for a second. When you picture the person who engineered a genocide, what do you see? I mean, probably some kind of snarling fanatic, right? A demonic figure just radiating hate. And back in 1961, that's exactly what the world expected to see when they tuned into this trial. They wanted to see a monster. But the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who was covering the trial, she saw something, well, something far more ordinary. And because of that, something so much more disturbing. This right here is the story of that paradox. Okay, so let's set the stage. The man at the absolute center of all of this was Adolf Eichmann. And really, his job title kind of tells you everything you need to know about the man himself. You see, he wasn't some wild-eyed general on the front lines. Not at all. He was a lieutenant colonel. His expertise, transportation, administration. He was the guy who created what you might call a one-stop system to deport millions of Jews from all over Europe to the death camps. His talent, his entire focus was efficiency. And the results of that chilling efficiency? The murder of 6 million men, women, and children. He was the logistical mastermind. He was the symbol of evil's bureaucratic power. And so, the world watched. Everybody was glued to this trial, finally expecting to lay eyes on the face of pure evil, to understand the heart of darkness. But what they actually saw through that glass, it was just shockingly, terrifyingly ordinary. So you have to be asking, how did this ghost from the Nazi past even wind up in that glass booth in the first place? Well, the story of his capture, it's straight out of a spy movie. After the war, Eichmann just, poof, vanished. For 15 years, he lived under a fake name, Ricardo Clement, hiding in plain sight in Argentina, which, as it turns out, was a pretty popular retirement spot for former high-ranking Nazis. But he wasn't forgotten. Not by a long shot. In May 1960, in this incredibly daring covert op, Mossad agents literally snatched him off a street near Buenos Aires, right after he got off the bus. They held him in a safe house for about a week, then sedated him, dressed him up like an airline crew member, and smuggled him out of the country on a special flight to finally face justice in Israel. All right, let's get to the absolute core of this story. So the trial starts, and as Eichmann begins to speak from inside his glass booth, his defense creates this terrifying puzzle. I mean, he just wasn't the monster everyone had built up in their minds. Even the Mossad agents who nabbed him were stunned by how unremarkable he was. Just a quiet, balding, middle-aged guy. He could have been anyone you pass on the street. And this is where Hannah Arendt drops her world-changing idea, the banality of evil. Now let's be super clear. Her point wasn't that the evil itself, the genocide, was banal or trivial. Of course not. What she was saying was that the person who did it, the perpetrator, was horrifyingly, shockingly banal. Over and over, Eichmann argued he was just a cog in the machine. But it wasn't just some flimsy excuse. He seemed to genuinely believe that his moral duty was to obey orders. He had completely flipped morality on its head. He actually claimed that not carrying out his gruesome tasks, that would have been the real crime. That's the one thing that would have given him a bad conscience. Arendt noticed that Eichmann wasn't stupid. He was just thoughtless. He talked in these empty official cliches, using bureaucratic jargon for mass murder, like final solution or resettlement. He was obsessed with his career, with promotions, with the pure efficiency of his train schedules. but he seemed utterly incapable of just stopping for 1 second to consider the actual human reality of his actions. He just couldn't think from anyone else's perspective. But Arendt's reporting didn't end there. She uncovered another layer to this moral collapse, a truth so uncomfortable it kicked off an absolute firestorm of controversy. She wrote about the role of some of the Judenräte, the Jewish councils appointed by the Nazis to manage the ghettos. She documented how these councils, under just unimaginable duress, ended up cooperating with the Nazis, providing lists of names, helping to organize the deportations, often with this terrible false hope that they could save some by sacrificing others. Now, her point was absolutely not to blame the victims, not even close. It was to show how a totalitarian system creates a total moral vacuum, where the lines between perpetrator and victim get terrifyingly blurry, and almost everyone gets pulled into its machinery. It was a deeply painful thing to write, and a lot of people just didn't understand it at the time. So what happened to the man in the glass booth? And what is the ultimate, chilling lesson he leaves for all of us? Well, the court completely threw out his defense of just following orders. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. And to make sure his grave couldn't become some kind of neo-Nazi shrine, his body was cremated and his ashes were scattered into the sea. His physical presence was completely wiped from the face of the earth. But the questions he and his trial raised, they are still with us today. And this really brings us to the final, terrifying takeaway. The most dangerous people out there aren't always the ones filled with hate, the fanatics. Sometimes they're just the people who stop thinking, the ones who follow orders without question, who just repeat the cliches of their time, and who refuse to imagine what their actions feel like for other human beings. And that's the question Hannah Arendt left for every single one of us. It's a challenge to stay vigilant, not against some cartoon monster hiding in the dark, but against the quiet, creeping, everyday normalization of the unthinkable, in our own lives and in our own societies. It's a challenge to simply never, ever stop thinking.